This is WOBC Oberlin, 91.5 FM, Oberlin College and Community Radio. I'm Owen Anderson, and with me is Jaimie Yue. Today, we are discussing a new album called Black in My Own Way by the DX Experiment, featuring the distinguished actor, musician, and Oberlin alumni, Avery Brooks. We're joined by Dante Xavier, the composer and producer of this album. Visit www.HarpSpaceHappening.com for streaming links and a free download of liner notes for the Black in My Own Way album by the DX Experiment. Dante Xavier is a multifaceted artist, poet, multi-instrumentalist, and composer. He has created hundreds of abstract paintings, collages, sculptures, and photographs, as well as written hundreds of poems. He is also a master of over 30 instruments, including guitar, bass, piano, drums, and percussion. Dante is light-skinned, identifies as Black, and is actively part of the Black community. Dante has studied music with several notable musicians and has developed his own innovative compositional format and performance concept called sentence structure. Urban Elixir from the album Black in My Own Way is Dante's first compositional piece using the sentence structure concept. Dante has also composed several works in another new concept called Blues Raga for future release. Hello, Dante.
Hello, how you doing, Owen?
I'm good. How are you? Jaimie, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Were you going to say something, Dante?
No, I was just going to say hello to Jaimie, that's all. I didn't want to leave her out.
So, Dante, I thought it would be good to start you started right away yesterday telling us the story of how kind of the impetus for this album. Do you think you could begin to say a little bit about that today?
Sure. I was about 19, 20 years old. I was watching this show on television, one of those shows like 2020 or something like that, and they were showing this piece on this terrible event that had taken place somewhere in the South. These white men decided to hitch a black man to the back of their pickup truck and drag him through the town. And that just stuck with me for the longest time. To this day, I still try not to imagine it, but it invades your thoughts sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I knew I wanted to do something or make a statement. And then as things seem to be happening in the past few years, especially the past couple years, the escalation of things happening, I felt that it needed to be said now. So I just composed this actually over a weekend. It kind of almost wrote itself. I know people say that cliche all the time, but it really did just flow out of me. I guess being so sensitive to things like that, injustice has always been something that's just not sat well with me. I guess it just flowed out of me in that way. Interesting thing that I've come to realize, I call this project Black in My Own Way because first means that exactly, to be black on your own terms. Basically, for the black community, for us to be able to have the same opportunities and basically social sanctuary, mm-hmm. without fear of artificial interference. By that, I mean law enforcement using this whole dystopian authoritative approach. I'm not saying that all police officers are bad. Of course not. That any more than anybody is bad. But it just simply means that law enforcement as a institution has really failed society, and specifically the black community. Mm-hmm. And really symptomatic of a larger problem, America has failed the black community for forever. I think it's just kind of like saying that we are not going to live our lives on the B side anymore. I mean, America is a great country until you read the fine print. We were also talking yesterday about how the 50s and people talk about that as the good old days in the 40s. Right. And the good old days for whom? If you were a woman, they weren't the good old days. If you were a black American, they weren't the good old days. Right. I'm sure for the American Indians, they haven't been a good old day for a long time. So it depends on who you ask, the good old days. And actually is interesting because Black in My Way, I've come to find out from different people who've listened to it and have commented to me, seems to mean different things to different people. Gay people can relate to it. More or less acknowledge me means that. Acknowledge me, accept me on my own terms for who I am. When I wrote this, I intended it for the black community to be black on their own terms. And that's what it meant to me at first, and it still does. But it seems that it kind of goes across the board to anyone, women, whoever, gay people, lesbians. It means something to everyone who wants to simply just be acknowledged and accepted for who they are without fear of judgment or any kind of ramifications for simply being who they are.
Right.
I really appreciate that insight because something that I was talking about yesterday too was how I feel like the way Black in My Own Way, the title and both how people have interpreted it, it's more of a unification in the community through Black culture. And that I feel like maybe like network news or the media tends to politicize identities based on how they're treated in society. But I really do think it's far more than that. When you're within that community, I don't think people like to relate to others through like, oh, hey, we've been through these terrible experiences in history. Instead, it's more like we celebrate this really vibrant culture. And I think that art and music are ways to express that. And I think it's a really important message.
Yes, I just want to say I think the way you expressed that as it being across the board and through the Black experience, that was very well put. I couldn't have said that better myself. I just want to add, based on what you're saying about that, another thing that we need to address and look at, I think, is the story that we tell. Because the story we tell is the story we're going to live. And as I actually was saying to you yesterday, that I believe that honoring things is one thing, and that's great. Great things that were done in history and great events that happen should be acknowledged. But I don't see anything constructive about remembering things and rehashing things and living things that happened that were not exactly pleasant in the first place, and remembering them is telling the same story. And if you want things to change, then you have to tell another story. As long as, for example, the Black community, as long as we are telling this story of injustice and wanting to be freer and treated in the way that we are supposed to be granted as American citizens, that's all fine to want that. But then instead of telling stories about instances where it's not being done, imagine it the way you want it to be. As a community, if you have everyone in the Black community, imagine everyone thinking this positive thought at one time and the power of that. Actually, John Lennon had this idea back in the 60s when he wrote the song, All You Need Is Love. He wanted that song to be broadcast throughout the whole world at one time. So he thought that if he could get the whole world thinking about love at one moment, the amount of energy that would create would just be astounding. And that's what he wanted to do. I don't think it ever came to be the way he wanted it to, but that was the original idea. And so imagine if the whole of society just decided to stop being in this story that we live in and tell another story, a story of what we could be, of what we all are entitled to as human beings. Forget about black, white, or anything else. As human beings.
Yeah, and that's what I really love about this project as a whole, because you were talking about how it comes from such a place of passion, and I can really tell because it just like it has such a timely message. It sounds so authentic, and it comes from a genuine place, and I can really tell.
It's the love of the Black community, yes, but it's a love of humanity too. And like I said about police officers, not every police officer is a bad person, and I'm not trying to say that. This project is not trying to say that. It's simply trying to say that the institution of law enforcement is not serving the community on a even keel and is not serving justice to everyone the way it's supposed to. And in particular, the Black community is victimized left and right. There was an article just yesterday about a sheriff shooting a Black man going into his own house in the back. Mm-hmm. So apparently we're not there. The law enforcement has a problem, and the Black community seems to be a victim of a loophole in the society. And we keep falling through that loophole, and it's kind of like Alice going through the rabbit hole, you know, and we find ourselves in this dystopian place. I'm not, saying for better or worse, it just is.
Yeah. Dante, I want you to talk a bit more about this, what you're saying of this piece, because I think I agree with what you're saying, is that what you're trying to put out there in this in this work is so of the moment. And I'm not sure all the listeners will fully realize this unless we tell them, because I want you to talk about what you told us yesterday of the recording process of this album and the people involved in it, of how it resonated with them and how humanly it was of the moment. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
Do you think?
First of all, let me just explain sentence structure a little bit. Sentence structure is a way of performing on your instrument where you are creating the flow and feel of a sentence, not per se trying to speak words through your instrument like a Charlie Brown thing. It's more the flow and feel of a sentence, and it had to be spontaneous and in the moment, like a conversation happens. As we're talking here, we're not rehearsing this. I'm not reading from a script or such thing like that, because I have no idea what you're going to say next, so I have to respond in that moment in kind. And so sentence structure is just like that, where, if you're going to have a conversation, it needed to sound like a conversation would naturally flow. So this had to be done in one take. I wanted to get their initial reaction, to what was going on, to this project, to what was being said. When they hear the spoken word and listen to that lyrical content and listen to that, well, we could talk about Avery Brooks later, but that voice, that's that voice. Yes, that's the voice. When you listen to that voice and to hear their response immediately to that, I didn't want them to, because, you say you're not going to do it. As musicians, we think we're not going to do it, but you get in there and you think, I'm going to do it again, and I'm not going to think about what I did before. But you do, because you're thinking like, oh, I really liked what I did there. But you see, the difference is when you did it there, it was something that was coming from your heart. You were speaking what you were feeling at that moment. To do it now, you're just trying to respond to what's going on around you now, as opposed to really just emoting what's coming from your soul. So that's never going to ring true. So I told everyone, I said, this has got to be done in one take. And we had a couple of phone conversations about things. And everyone was given the spoken word as a script, because, they needed to read this as their script, because you can't play a character or a part unless you've read your script. So they needed to read this and just absorb this as if they were going to act out a play, which is basically what we're doing here. Avery was reading the spoken word, but as opposed to poetry readings where they may have a band there, and the band is just kind of comping. I don't know if you know what comping is. It's short in music terms for complimenting. You're just playing little things underneath to kind of support what's going on in the text of the moment of what they're reading. But that isn't what this was. When you're listening to the instrumentation going on around Avery, it's not simply backing him. What they're doing in essence is they are reciting the spoken word along with him. So you're getting to hear the musicians interpreting this work simultaneously as Avery is reciting this himself.
Right.
And so now you're hearing two sides of this thing, creating a more of a...
Yesterday, I think you said a true musical.
Yes, a true musical and a more substantial three-dimensional experience for the listener. Just that they are in that moment with the artists that are playing, because it's happening at that moment. And you're listening to a live conversation. And you can feel, if you really listen, and actually, as we said yesterday, you said yourself, every time you listen to it, you hear things that you didn't hear before. And 5 years from now, you'll hear things that you didn't hear now, because you'll be in a different place in your own evolution, and you're hearing this conversation going on in that moment, and you're hearing a thought being conveyed. If you really listen to this, you'll hear thoughts being conveyed between these musicians. They're not just playing babble. There's a connection that happened immediately as soon as we went in there. All the musicians were scared to death, because they had never, most of them hadn't ever played before without some kind of a written chart for them. Black in My Own Way is a formalized piece of music. There's no written score, but it does have a score. It's just not written out in notes. And this one brother came up to me and he said, I am so nervous. I said, nervous is great as long as you're not scared. If you're scared, then you're going to be timid, you're going to hold back, and I'm not going to get what I need from you. But he says, I'm plenty nervous, he said, and they were popping. We had M&Ms there because I had the whole thing catered because we were going to be there for a long time. We were there for we thought it was going to take like 3 or 4 hours maybe to do this whole thing. But setup and sound checks, and by the time we got done, we started at 6 o'clock in the evening. We didn't get done until 5 o'clock in the morning. One of the drummers on this project, Kenwood Denard, he had to drive all the way back to downtown Boston at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he had to teach a class at 8 o'clock. He actually teaches at Berklee College of Music in Boston. We recorded this in the countryside of New Hampshire, but he didn't want to go. Nobody wanted to leave. I'm like, I know you guys got to go. I didn't mean to keep you this long. So I said, you can all go, but everybody stuck around because I had said, well, we're going to do this other part, like the other surrounding tracks. We did Urban Elixir, and there were certain musicians, everybody played on Urban Elixir, but I had other musicians that played on Urban Elixir that did other parts with me, and we interchanged. Nobody was on every piece except me. So after that, we did a couple other tunes, and everybody just stuck around because they just wanted to hear it. I don't know if you've listened to all the music yet, but there's a piece on there where it's meant to be a interpretation of a drum solo. And basically, the track is called Alphabet Factory. I wrote this whole thing out phonetically, believe it or not. But what I did was, I didn't want to write out a thing like that. Write the drum solo and now sing this, Kenwood. Because I knew if he tried to do that, first of all, you could never do it at a real-time pace and really recite all these things. Like what I was writing down were things like boom, chick, chick, boom, chick, 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 chicka-boom, chicka-boom, chick, chick, and you're trying to say all that and read all this and get all that down. It's hard enough to say the things without trying to memorize this whole, whole thing. And I put it into this kind of a format for him that he could just pick and choose what he wanted spontaneously within the context of all the written stuff there. And he just improvised this thing right off the top of his head. He took all the words that I wrote, and I wrote them down in a way, and I gave him a kind of a sensibility of a drum solo, but I didn't write out a drum solo for him to do. And he did the whole thing in one take. It was incredible to watch him. But see, everybody was sticking around, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of this whole thing, I'd love to take credit for it, but I can't. I can't take credit for this. In the middle of the performance, I'm sitting there, I'm playing the drums on this along with him. I'm comping him with the drum kit, and he's doing this whole boom chick chick thing. And all of a sudden, in the middle of it, he just pulls out a jaw harp and starts going, and everybody just starts laughing, just on the floor laughing. Not because it was bad. It was just so unexpected and just perfect, It's one of those things where you just can't plan it, And he just pulled the thing out and just started playing. And I looked over and I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm digging this. And then he starts doing this kind of in between the whole jaw harp thing, which I play the jaw harp. I know how difficult it is to just play the thing alone. And he starts doing this whole vocalese thing on top of the jaw harp. He starts just going do 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 do. This whole thing, he just starts doing this, and it's just like, wow. And this is all spontaneous, and we never rehearse this thing. And that's why I don't rehearse things, because you don't get things like that if you rehearse things. You never get things like that. And you don't get a second chance at something like that. So thank God the tape was rolling.
Mm-hmm. That all sounds really great, and just how the benefits of just those kind of organic things happening can lead to such unexpected surprises. But I actually wanted to pull back a little bit, and so you had like a kind of a non-traditional way of putting together this album with like minimal rehearsals and these kinds of
no
rehearsals and these kinds of spontaneous events happening. So how did you go about selecting these musicians who are kind of willing to put themselves out there like this and just dive in with no rehearsals?
Actually, it's very much like the way I chose Oberlin as the first people that I have spoken to about this in any kind of an interview, formal tense, if you will. And the same way with the musicians. Some of these musicians are known. They've done things like Kenwood Denard has played with lots of people. I'm not one for dropping names. In fact, my whole bio that you spoke out about at the beginning, which thank you very much for that.
It is a very humble bio, by the way. It does not include everything.
I tried to keep it to the very basics, and and not colorize it in any way. I just wanted it to be the core truth. These are the things I do, and that's not a big deal. I do them. And the same thing with these musicians, like with Kenwood. He's played with people like Aretha Franklin, James Brown, Maceo Parker, who played with James Brown, Bootsy Collins, Whitney Houston. He's an incredible musician and an incredible person, and I'm proud to call him my friend. I asked him to do it, and he pretty much said, yeah, I'm there for you.
There's some big name people that just heard the project and went, oh yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. Avery Brooks. I approached him. I didn't have to coax him in any way. He looked at it. He said, this is important. I want to be a part of this. And that was it. But there are people on it that aren't known. Mostly people on it that aren't known. I didn't pick people because they were famous. They had to be the right people. For example, like this whole piece is about Dr. King's id, his psyche, and this inner voice that was going on within him. So there were 3 basses in this playing the part of Dr. King, and each one had their own unique voice. They needed to be spoken in a certain way. The id had to be this kind of a very methodical, logical approach, and the superego had to be this kind of above everything, the cosmic person, that we are, where we all come from. Then the other voice had to be more like the arbitrator, which is the ego played by Mark Wilson in this whole scenario. So everyone was chosen for their voices. The brother who played the id, he was very talkative on his instrument, shall we say. He was a very busy player. And some people might think that's not a good thing, but in this case, it was a good thing. It was exactly what I was looking for. And then I needed someone for the superego to be a more ethereal kind of can blend in with everything. And those gentlemen are Kevin Barber and Joe Pirog. They were perfect. They did a great job. And then another person that I had on this that played the acoustic bass is somebody that another person who is no slouch in his own right. He's an incredible musician. Mark Wilson. He's from Texas. He drove all the way from Texas to do this project. Literally, he drove because he did not want to put his bass on a plane. And,
of course.
Which I named Big Bertha because this thing is huge. This double bass he's got it's huge. It's a behemoth. I named her. I said, Bertha's talking, baby. Bertha's talking. Better listen. So he drove from Texas, and believe this or not, he made it from Texas to New Hampshire in 2.5 days. He didn't sleep. I think he took one stop at a hotel on the way, and then he just drove. He drove halfway, slept, and then drove the other half of the way. I'm like, you're crazy. He said, well, I wanted to make sure I was there on time. And he actually got there 2 days early.
I think that is a testament to how excited everyone was to work on this piece and how important it is once you get involved, which is why I hope that everyone that listens to this interview will go listen to the album, because it has something for everyone and you can feel the overwhelming,
and it's such a labor of love. I can
tell. And it's a mountain of energy that people have put into this. Undoubtedly, Dante has put in everything into this that he can. So yeah, I think that story is a good testament to the importance that this project has in people's lives.